I don't think there's anyone that I came across in the army who was like, I'm doing this for my country. Like, when you wake up at 6:30 and you sing the national anthem, no one's singing it proudly. No one's singing it at all sometimes. So it's never for the republic, and there's no pride involved.
Coming back to the word 공화국, South Koreans tend not to say 우리 공화국.
Yeah.
They say 우리나라.
Yeah.
They don't say 우리 공화국. North Koreans say 우리 공화국.
Yeah.
It also left me with some questions about how Korea was like relying on the US and how it might be risky in the future, and I also thought what I'm supposed to do as a Korean citizen.
Those who cannot paint grey cannot be a painter. And this also applies to historians, that historians who cannot be grey should not be historians.
I would encourage both Eunbi and Charlie to popularise the phrase 우리 공화국. Use it. Obviously, David and I, it's forbidden for us. We can't possibly say it because we are not citizens. We are not 공민. We're not citizens of the 공화국. We're not 공민. But you two, I would like to beseech you to popularise that phrase 우리 공화국. Make your friends and parents and loved ones say it, and then maybe it'll catch on, and maybe it'll start to get the love it deserves.
Today on the Korea Deconstructed podcast, we're discussing a newly released book, 사랑받지 못하는 공화국. It's written by Professor Bryan Myers, a professor of international studies at Dongseo University in Busan. And anyone familiar with North Korean studies will be keenly aware of Mr. Myers and his work, as he has written some excellent books on that subject, including The Cleanest Race and the Juche myth. When he speaks and gives interviews, there's normally great interest in his work, and at the same time he's elusive and an enigmatic figure, as well as being no stranger to strong opinions online. His latest book reveals two firsts. It's his first written in Korean, and it's his first that deals primarily with South Korean politics. Professor Myers has said that the book's original thrust is the argument that the right neglected and still neglects the work of state building, but most young people, being centrist or progressive, are just not interested in that issue. We're going to try and see if he's achieved that or not. To discuss the book, we are joined by a friend, Mr. Jacco Zwetsloot, host of the NK News podcast, a gentleman with a keen knowledge and interest of all things Korean. Good to see you, Jacco.
Nice to be back again.
Thank you. With him we have Charlie Kyunghoon, returning for the third time. He's previously talked about time in the South Korean military and life in Seoul. Charlie?
It's great to be back. Thank you.
Thank you. And for the first time by Ko Eunbi, university student here in Seoul. Hello, Eunbi.
Nice to meet you.
Very good. So we've filled all the seats of the table, I hope, by having foreign, Korean, young, old, male and female voices covering a range of perspectives. Now, reading this book, we all have a copy of it here on the table. The first thing that we're going to start with is something that caught my attention, which is about the idea of history, a central part of this book. And it's the idea that South Korea is seen through the lens of an ancient territory, whereas North Korea is seen through the lens of its modern political system. And Professor Myers, he makes this claim in the book that Koreans don't know when the start of their republic is, the start of their country, and the majority of Americans know 4th of July and things like this, right? It's etched into their culture. And when I saw this idea that Korean people don't know when 대한민국, the Republic of Korea, started, I took a step back and thought, no, surely that's not right. I asked the people in my house. I didn't ask my brother-in-law because he's in the military and I didn't want him to say he didn't know. I asked the people in my house and none of them knew. I then went to my classrooms and asked some students. I then went to the pub and asked some people there. I asked the owner of this studio. None of them knew. And I was kind of shocked by that when I asked these people, when did South Korea start? There were lots of different answers, but none of them were the right answer. And I knew the answer. And I'm sure many other professors and people might, but Korean people didn't. Can I start with this question for you that seems to be framing a lot of Myers' work? What's your take on this? Does it match your experience? Do people know when Korea started? Lead us off, Jacco.
I'm going to answer your question with another question.
Okay.
Which is, do Korean people care when the Republic started? And I think that one to me is a clear no.
Right.
That Koreans, it's not like they're confused and some are walking around saying, it definitely started in 1919. No, it started in 1948. Come here, we'll have a fight about it. Koreans don't talk about it. They don't care. Now, similarly, in Australia, if you were to, where I grew up, if you were to ask most Australians, when did Australia change from being a colony to a nation? When did Australia get nationhood? A lot of Australians, if they thought about it, they might remember, oh yes, it was January the 1st, 1901. But if you think about it, that's not a great date to choose nationhood, because you're always going to confuse New Year's Day, or not confuse, but the day of nationhood will always be overshadowed by the fact that every January the 1st is a New Year's Day, and that's a big celebration. So nobody thinks about, oh, this is that day that Australia became a nation 120 years ago. No one cares about that. They care about January 1st as Australia Day. Now, Lee Seung-man chose August 15, 1948. I mean, not by himself, but with others. They chose 1948, August 15, the 3 days after Japan lost the war, to be the day that they declare the Republic of Korea. I think, strategically, I can understand why they did it, but in hindsight, it wasn't a great date to choose, because now everybody just thinks of Kwangbokjeol is only liberation from Japan. But actually, if you look at articles in the National Encyclopedia, Kwangbokjeol is not just 45, it's also 48. So it's both August 15th in both of those years. The return of light to Korea is the establishment of the Republic, but people just think of it now as being, it's when Japan lost the war. Would that be, what do you think? Is that about right?
So, I mean, it's all true, very interesting. And when I was asked this question, my mind went back thousands of years, because you go to Gwanghwamun and the two statues that you have are of Sejongdaewang and Lee Sun-shin. Neither of them were even close to being alive when the Republic of Korea was first founded. So Korean history itself goes back, centuries. So when, I was asked that question, I obviously don't think of 1948. I go, centuries back. But when you think about South Korea and North Korea as two independent countries, then I guess the answer is very different.
And Korean people don't care. This was Jacco was saying. Everybody's different. There's a lot, but it's not. The reason they might not know is that if you ask a Korean person when did it start, it's not that interesting, or it's not important in the grand scheme of things.
I don't think I know a single Korean who would be able to answer this question.
Same for me. I mean, I think definitely the National Liberation Day was, I think, is much important than the discovery of Republic of Korea for me. And when I also saw the date, August 15th, which is a little embarrassing, but I first thought it was a Liberation Day. So I was like, perhaps it's the same day, but it was actually 3 years afterwards. So, yeah.
When I asked the studio owner when it was in Korean before we started, he said, and so he went there, realized it was Gwangbokjeol, the Liberation Day, when Korea gains its independence from the Japanese, and then he retracted. So there was this decision to put them on the same day, but 3 years apart. At the time, it might have made sense, but now we're in a situation where South Korean people, when they think of August the 15th, they don't think of the start of our country, the start of our republic, but instead they think of, we're free from the Japanese.
And I haven't, academically, we could prove this if we looked at speeches, Kwangbokjeol's speeches in the last 20, 30 years of various presidents of South Korea. Do they talk about 1948, or do they only refer to the defeat of the Japanese? Now, I have a suspicion, without doing the analysis, that the focus is on 1945, the defeat of Japan. The focus is not on what happened in 1948, where the First Republic was created.
Yeah. I would continue this non-scientific analysis by suggesting, through my memory, which is incredibly fallible, that the previous Democratic administration under President Moon Jae-in, they often talked about 1919 as well. There was a big focus on going back even before to try to have this legitimacy, and they would often play down sort of American involvement. There was more of a focus on, we're the Koreans, we've been doing this since 1919, going against the Japanese, and this might just be my only my own personal reading of it. Whereas the Conservative government, now in charge under President Yoon, they're more likely to play up America's role in helping building the nation and maybe come to this date a little bit more. That's how I see it, although, of course, speech analysis would be necessary on that.
So this difference between the length of history of Korea, as Charlie mentioned, going back thousands of years, and a republic that was only created in 1948, that's really, I think, at the heart of Bryan's book here, is that he's trying to tease apart the difference between a belief in a nation, an ethno-nation, so the Minjok, Korea as Minjok, Korea as a group of people speaking a common language, on the one hand, and this idea of a republic, a nation-state, the modern nation-state on the other hand. And as you said in the introduction, he's complained, and it's not, I think from the book, he's not just complaining that the right has not built up a state nationalism. He's saying every government since 1945, right, left, or somewhere in between, has not placed enough focus on creating a state consciousness, a state nationalism within Korean people, so that the result is that the level of trust and positive feeling about the state, about the republic, about the thing that this symbol stands for is very low. But the level of faith and hope and trust and love in the Minjok, the nation, is much higher. And because you've got two Koreas on the same peninsula, each of which is appealing to that same Minjokshin, that same heart of the ethno-nation, ultimately, he says that South Korea is not going to beat North Korea in that battle, because it's trying to be a more moderate sort of ethno-nationalism, whereas North Korea is much more a hardcore, radical ethno-nationalism. And the weaker will never beat out the stronger in this case. That if you look through world history, again, this is what Bryan has said, not only in his book, but also in his speech and his blog, if you look through world history, that the strong ethno-nationalist spirit tends to play better and sell better to an audience than a moderate or weak nationalism does.
And I get the impression that Bryan is very fearful of what is possible. I mean, with his experiences in South Africa, in Germany, seeing those things. And he gives the example of the sinking of the Cheonan and saying, and we'll come to that, but before we come to the Cheonan, let's stay on this republic or the nation. So is South Korea, does it identify itself with the republic or the nation? Now, South Korea is home to a very proud and patriotic people. First coming here, seeing the taegukis and the Korean flags lining the streets, seeing them in the police stations and things like that. I wasn't used to seeing so many national flags everywhere coming from the UK. They weren't as prominent. And I came here and I realized that the Korean people are very proud, and they do. They chant and they sing and they put their patriotism out there. But what Bryan is saying in this book is that they're favoring the nation over the republic. There's this one line, I'm not sure if it was in the book or another blog that he wrote, where if Korea does something good, the nation is responsible. And if something bad happens, it's the republic and it's the government and it's bad administration. And so it goes that way. He also suggests that there's no heroes of the republic. So Charlie, you mentioned in Gwanghwamun, downtown, we have the statues of Lee Sun-shin and Sejongdaewang, both put by Park Chung-hee, I believe, in the 1960s.
Sejong was much later, but Admiral Lee was put there during the 1960s. And ironically, and I think he hints at this in the book there, those various statues of Lee Sun-shin around Korea were set up by Park Chung-hee around the time that he was normalizing relationships with Japan. So by putting up Lee Sun-shin, it's a reminder that we're not betraying the nation. We're still very much, our own Minjok. We're still very much the Korean people. We might have relations with Japan, but we remember what the Japanese did to us during the Hideyoshi invasions of the late 1500s. So, plus also, you might say that it could have been a little bit of, I am a stand-in for Lee Sun-shin. So here's these statues. I can't put up statues of me, but I'll put up statues of another Korean hero, and you can look at him and you might think of me, as a reminder.
Last time Charlie was on here, he told us that he has a tattoo of Lee Sun-shin on him. I mean, there's some patriotism, yeah?
I think he's like one of the history's greatest badass. I'm not sure on the figure, maybe you can correct me, but he was like a lot of his ships were destroyed, and there was basically like little to no hope because they were all outnumbered. And Lee Sun-shin goes to the king, and the king's like, okay, well, we're screwed. And then Lee Sun-shin says something like, no, I still have like 13 ships, let's go. And then he went, and then he was like, Sherlock, BBC Sherlock, when he's like calculating everything, and he's like looking at the waves, and he like matches it. He perfectly times the shifting tides to strategically beat the shit out of Japan. And I think that was like one of the greatest stories from history that I had ever heard. And that's why it was like 2 a.m. But I called my tattoo artist. I was like, listen, we need to get a Lee Sun-shin tattoo on me right away.
Right away. Don't get out of bed. I'm coming down. Gee.
So the idea that who are the heroes then of the Republic? There's no hero, and so he's making the point that there's no holiday for the Republic. There's no the heroes on the currency. We have Lee Sun-shin, we have Sejong, we have these figures of old Korea, but the Republic itself.
And we have October 3rd, right? The Gechonjol, the Heavens Opening Day.
Yeah.
This is nothing to do with the Republic.
Yeah.
It's all to do with when in Gojoseon, I don't know, Hwanung came down, or anyway, that old story that led to the birth of Tangun had nothing to do with the Republic at all. So you're right that there's more focus on Minjok in holidays and in different days than there is in Republic.
Yeah.
And what does that do? It leads to a reduced feeling of what does he call it? State nationalism.
Yes.
And if you have a weak state nationalism, you can't have a strong security consciousness. Now, I find this is an interesting question for Charlie, having been in the army. Is it possible to have a strong feeling of protecting the nation's security if you don't care too much about the state that you live in?
It's a really interesting question, and I think at one point, almost every soldier in boot camp, they'll ask themselves this question, or some form of this question, like, what am I really doing here? Like, what is my purpose in the army? Like, and there's this mentality that you shouldn't stick out in the army. You're all insignificant cogs in this, in the army, which is the machine that keeps Korea alive. But a lot of people who work hard in the army, it's not for patriotism, but they kind of indoctrinate you like a cult, and that's what boot camp is, right? It's like you forget about everything that you believed in, like forget about your family. You have no identity, which is why you're not allowed to have any personal possessions. You leave your shoes and your clothes back at home. Your hair. So everyone, you're just like, you just look like ants. If you look from far away, you see all these these soldiers marching to boot camp, and you'll feel so insignificant in that moment. But you don't do it for the country, but you do it out of, well, for one thing, fear of punishment, because they love beating you up in the army, and two, you are in you're in this state where you're so afraid. So you just stick to whoever you can, and you have this sense of brotherhood and family. So you do it for them. But I don't think there's anyone that I came across in the army who was like, I'm doing this for my country. Like when you wake up at 6:30 and you sing the national anthem, no one's singing it proudly. No one's singing it all sometimes. So it's never for the Republic, and there's no pride involved. It's always for yourself or for the people around you.
And why do you think that is?
It's very hard to feel grateful for a country when you feel like your country has done so little for you. And so this is interesting because in the book, Bryan Myers, he mentions 헬조선은 이게 나라냐. And 이게 나라냐, I've heard a lot in the army.
Could you give us just a translation for the English listeners?
Well, it's like,
hard, but...
is this... Well, literally it means, how is this a country? Yeah. How is this an actual functioning country? Like, this is not the way a country should function. it's basically, you know, criticizing the republic, obviously, and it's never like Korea. It's never the people. It's always the government, the republic, like the people in charge, and there's always this resentment towards the state because it's like you have to give up a year and a half of your life, and
which is so much less than it used to be.
Which is right.
How long was your father in the army for? I bet it was more than 2 years.
Slightly under 3 years.
Slightly under 3 years.
Yeah.
So it's about half of what it used to be.
Yeah.
Lucky you.
Right. And I want. Do you think? Sorry to interrupt there, but
Sure.
do you think that perhaps in your father's generation that feeling of patriotism might have been higher than it is now?
I'm inclined to think yes, actually, because the more you give the people, the more dissatisfied they are, right? And at that point, you like they got nothing, right? I'm not sure if this is a fact, but they did often give soldiers like a carton of cigarettes, and that was part of your pay, because like everyone smoked like chimneys back then, and you're gonna spend the money on cigarettes anyway, and it like you get a lot of stuff from the army, but a carton of cigarettes, it was a part of the things that you receive from the army on a monthly basis, and I don't know, probably made like 10 won back then, basically nothing. Now I know sergeants make slightly over 100만 won, which is a lot of money, yes, but you have nothing, like you have no freedom, right? And if say you work in the 7-Eleven, and you add up the hours that you work in the army, and you work that much at a convenience store, you'll make like much more than that. So no amount of money will satisfy the soldiers, and it's a very controversial topic. But you obviously know that I really enjoyed my time in the army, and I am patriotic, but I do also recognize a lot of the issues that exist in Korean society.
Did you like the army because it made you better rather than protecting the country? Because I think you've spoken about this 개인적인 발전 or something, like you came out looking good and looking ripped and healthy and with a new mentality on life. I know I keep saying that, but also with a new mentality on life. And did you like the army not because it instilled patriotism, but because it made you better as an individual?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge part of it. But I think this is a very this is my personal opinion. The reason I don't share the mutual hatred for the Korean army, like a lot of other Korean guys, is because I was a Korean boy who grew up in New Delhi, India. So I was a foreigner there. And when I came back to Korea, I spoke very little Korean. So I looked Korean, but I couldn't speak the language. So I was like kind of like an outsider. And I remember it was very difficult for me to make friends. So I was an outsider there, and I felt like an outsider here my whole life. And then I came to Korea, and even as an adult, my Korean wasn't great. And COVID hit, and I was locked away in my house, and it was just an extremely difficult time. And I think that's when my identity crisis hit. And I felt like I had no real place that I could call home. And I felt like the answer to that was to go to the army. So I'd go in, you remember me, my fat Charlie, goes into the army, runs every day, works his ass off, sings the national anthem about 500 times.
Wow.
And
every day at 6:30. I didn't know that about that.
Yeah, 6:30, 7, and 7 on the weekends.
Okay.
And in my mind, I felt like by the end of this journey, I think I would allow myself to call myself a Korean. And Koreans have this thing, like, are you Korean? Are you a Kyopo? Are you Korean American? Like, why does it matter? Right? Like, you know the Jonathan, the black celebrity in Korea?
Yes.
Yeah, so no one would actually, he speaks Korean better than I do. Yeah. And even if he's a citizen, no one would actually call him Korean. But that's not the case for other countries. Like, if you have a British passport, and even if you look like me or you look Indian, you can just say, I'm British, and people will be okay with it.
Prime Minister, the Mayor of London, our football team. Yes. I'm with you.
In Korea, like, I felt like I had to earn the right to call myself Korean. And in hindsight, it's really stupid because it doesn't really mean anything, right? It's just a label. Like, who decides who gets to be Korean and who's not? And obviously, I don't regret my time in the army, but it just goes to show how sensitive the Korean people are. And going back to the book, what I found really interesting is the beginning of the book. It starts by Bryan Myers saying, he's very like apprehensive about it, right? Yeah. He's like, you may feel like this is just like a foreigner talking about Korean politics, and you, the readers, obviously, like the majority of the readers will be Korean because it's written in Korean. Will be like, oh, this is just like a foreigner talking about Korean politics. Like, who the hell does he think he is? And even that's what he begins with. And even in the end, he says, 이 책의 서두에서는 나는 한국인에게 이래라 저래라. Like, he's like, again, he's being apprehensive about it. Like, even after having read the whole thing, he's warning the readers, like, don't take this as a message of me as a foreigner telling you guys what to do. But regardless of whether you agree with the content of this book or not, because there are some parts that I don't agree with, but I think what's important about this is, A, he's not biased, right? And he's saying, I'm talking about this because the people who should be talking about this aren't. And I think that's when it really hit home for me. And he's writing it in the Korean language. It's not in English. So everyone has to listen to what he has to say. If you're Korean or you care about Korea, you live in Korea, you have any ties to Korea, I think that's where it really hit home for me.
So really, the Korean Army should be handing out copies of this to every new recruit.
I think so.
There you go. That's an endorsement. We should get General John in and tell him that.
He's a busy man. He's been flying over to Hawaii and things like this. Yeah, General John Inbum, wish you well, sir. Eunbi, I'm going to come to you because we're talking about this Republican nation, and Bryan in this book is saying that Korea sees itself as a nation, and that's hard. Because then that puts the effort on the minjok, and it's hard to be Korean here if you don't fit in a role. If it was a republic, it would be very easy. If it was a republic, you wouldn't batter your eyelids. Jonathan, the celebrity, is he Korean Ghanaian? Am I getting that? Or is he just Korean? I'm just trying to describe him for those that don't know him. He often appears on history shows. Find out if Charlie can.
Yeah. He is Congolese Korean.
Okay. Congolese Korean, yeah. Seems like a very nice chap, speaks really well, is very, doing that. The Republic and the nation, the minjok, like, is this a Korean thing? Because we don't sort of talk about a minjok, a national ethnic identity in Europe as much. We're a bit scared of that.
I mean, I think it's definitely nation-centered, because for me, like, when I used to learn history from elementary school or even in middle school, it was usually focused on the perspective of what the citizens have been through, not in the perspective of like the republic and government. So I think it was also, I wouldn't say biased, but it was basically much more focused and on those nation-wise, yes.
Can you say something about Tanil Minjok? Like, do you feel that? Is that something to you? I mean, Charlie's talked about his own, like, conflict in the army and becoming Korean. So Tanil Minjok, like this ethnic Korean identity?
I think, I mean, I'm blanking.
You know what it means, I guess.
Yes, I mean, like, as a united citizens.
It's weird in the modern world, though, isn't it? Yeah, it's not something that resonates.
Isn't it about the concept of Korea as one race, of homogeneous people? Everyone looks Korean. They were all descended from Kyunghoon, the mythical proto-father of Korea. And, and now suddenly in the last 30, 40 years, we're seeing children born of Korean and non-Korean. So that Tanil Minjok concept is being challenged a bit. That's this what the Korean government calls the 다문화주의, this multiculturalism that we're seeing. Actually, it's multiracialism, it's multi-ethnicism, but that's the concept of so that's challenging Tanil Minjok now.
And the Minjok still has that holiday, doesn't it? In October, the Foundation Day, 2333 BC.
Right.
Tangun Halabody and the bear and the tiger.
And the garlic and the mugwort.
Yeah. It's all played out. And that's there, but a story about the Republic isn't. The people is together. I want to come on to the like sort of anti-Japan element of this, but in the beginning of the book, we have this sinking of the Cheonan. And this was 2010 under the Lee Myung-bak administration, and a South Korean ship is sunk by a torpedo. Multiple lives lost. Memory, I want to say 36, but I'll stand corrected. It's around there. North Korea has been accused of this. They haven't claimed responsibility, as far as I know, to date.
They still deny it.
They still deny it, but most of the evidence is all pointing and saying that they did this. When I teach this to my students, a lot of them say, well, what did South Korea do? Like, where's the reaction? Because I go through this kind of list of atrocities sometimes as part of a balanced thing, but I talk about the commando raid, I talk about the assassination attempt on Park Chung-hee that killed the First Lady, the Rangoon bombing in 1983. I go through all these, and my students sometimes ask, well, what did Korea do in return? Like, did you go up? Did you do something? Bryan Myers in the start of this book says when the Cheonan is sank and South Korean soldiers perish in the water, if this was a different country, there would be an outcry. There would be a demand for blood or something. And I think he's right to say that I didn't feel this at the time. Obviously, there was outrage and outcry, but there wasn't a retaliatory strike back from the Cheonan.
I think there are two... one immediate thing that mitigates against that feeling of let's retaliate, and that is that in all of the instances you mentioned before, the assassination of Park Chung-hee and the Burma bombing, very quickly they were able to find the perpetrator, the person who did it. And in the case of the Cheonan, I remember there being confusion and mystery about what happened here. It wasn't like the ROK Navy got a submarine on camera shooting a projectile and blowing up the Cheonan. So it took some time to piece these things together and to work it out. So that's, I think, the first thing that really led there to be a slowness of reaction. And then the second thing was that, unfortunately, because Lee Myung-bak, as president, had very little support in people who didn't vote for him, so the left of society, very quickly there grew this conspiracy theory that, it's all bullshit. It wasn't a North Korean submarine. It was an accident. It was an American sub that struck the Cheonan, and the Cheonan sank because of that, or it was anything else but the North Korean. So, and this conspiracy theory, I remember, it took hold amongst a lot of people in South Korea. To this day, I haven't done any surveys, so I'm unscientific in that regard, but I just feel that they haven't looked critically at that conspiracy theory and said, oh yeah, we were wrong. Because remember that they actually, Lee Myung-bak, he was so worried that people wouldn't believe him, that they organized a 5-nation investigatory committee. Sweden was involved, Australia was involved, the United States, of course, was involved, Korea, I forget who else was involved. But anyway, there were multiple nations involved. And the conclusion was, yes, this looks indeed, from all the evidence that we can find, like it was a torpedo from a North Korean submarine. But people still didn't believe it. So they went through the steps to try to prove it. We can, to this day, we can go down to Pyeongtaek and look at the Cheonan and see the damage that was done. It was not a normal sinking. It was not like it struck a whale and went down. I mean, it is broken in half. It is... it's quite visceral to look at it, and I think the evidence is in. But at that time, the belief wasn't there, so that kind of held people back from saying we must respond. Now, in what Bryan Myers does later on in the book, of course, he talks about what happened later in 2010, which is the shelling of Yeonpyeong-do.
Yes. That
was a no-brainer. You could see immediately those shells are coming from North Korea to Yeonpyeong-do. Now, where was the response in that one? Now, in that case, Lee Myung-bak was ready he had the planes up in the air. They were ready to go and bomb those artillery tubes in North Korea. But phone calls came from the U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and the Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, and they basically talked President Lee Myung-bak down and said, don't do this because we're worried that it might lead to a worse escalation. So there certainly was a desire in the military and in the Blue House to let's hit back because we know who did it this time. So a very different response, I think, in the Cheonan and in the Yeonpyeong-do. And I remember being that day, sorry to go on so long, I was with a group of, you and I have both had the pleasure of teaching at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy at different times.
Yes, Danton Ford.
That year with Danton Ford in October, November 2010 when Yeonpyeong-do was shelled, I forget the month, but it was October or November.
Yeah, it's around there.
That particular day, we were taking a busload of young Korean diplomats in training up to the British Embassy for an evening of debate.
Okay.
And as they were sitting on the bus outside the Korean National Diplomatic Academy, all of them were looking at their phone, and their faces were white and their mouths were open because they were getting the news that the shelling had happened, and they were worried about what happens now. You know, so there was definitely a sense of fear. I didn't sense rage from them, like we've got to head back, but there was a sense of, God, this could lead to war if it escalates.
And that was America sort of holding the leash there on that thing, because that's the story that I've heard as well. The planes are there ready to go after the bombing of Yongbyon. And Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, you say,
and Secretary of Defense Robert Gates apparently both reached out to Im Young-bak either directly or through an intermediary and said, no, we don't think it's a good idea. Don't do this now.
Yeah. So there's that played. I guess this idea of, before we come on to the Japan one, then the North Koreans. Like, so the North Koreans as brothers and sisters. On the way over here, Eunbi, you were saying that when you were a kid, you had to do like 통일 과제s in elementary school, and they're this. Charlie, you've stood across from them with sniper rifles at the DMZ and things like this. If they're part of the nation, if Korea is seen as a nation, then North Koreans are kind of related to you in some way. But if this is a republic, and maybe that's where Bryan is going with this, maybe, but if Korea is a republic, then North Korea is an enemy of the republic. It's a friend of the nation. I'm kind of just making assertions here. I'm not saying this is true, but what I'm trying to pick up from what he's saying, that if South Korea views it as a nation, North Korea are part of that story. And the nation's history takes part in Kaesong and Pyongyang and all of these places, and in Manchuria. That's part of the nation's story, and you have a shared thing. If this is a republic, North Korea is your enemy. Like, it's causing an existential threat to this place. So I know this is a really sensitive subject, but on the subject of North Korea, but like, where does North Korea fit into this nation and republic thing for you guys?
I think both, because I think I also learned, I don't know what's it called in English, but there's a law where the South Korean were, they got a chance to meet their family from North Korea. And by looking at that, and as you already mentioned, I grew up with how the unification was the best for Korea. And by looking at that, I thought it would be the best to think North Koreans and the unification and thinking them as the same national people is the best. But as you said, I mean, there are also lots of issues that we're dealing with North Korea and the threatenings. So I'm also in the middle of, I'm also confused whether I should think them as friends, as 동지, or the enemy. I think is interesting. But I wouldn't really think of them as enemy.
Do you think of them as like brothers and sisters and family? And
I think it's confusing. Yeah, it's ironic.
It's confusing, but also it's hard to say sometimes, isn't it? Because it's very political and it's very right at the heart of Korea. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
There's a quote from in the last chapter of the book, in the chapter 20, the Kyolon, the conclusion, where Bryan cites a British academic. I'd not heard of him before, Barry Busan.
I've heard, yes. I know.
And that he says there on page 153 that where you have, and I'm loosely translating here, where you have an ethnic group, so divided ethnic groups split into two nations of the same ethnicity, will inevitably inevitably threaten the security of each other. And he says that the idea, that the concept of the state is made insecure or unstable by the concept of ethnicity, of this minjok. And so you could look at Ireland, for example, that the division of Ireland led to decades of instability, where you had the Irish Republican Army trying to foment rebellion in Northern Ireland, and that went on until the Good Friday Accords. So that was one example of that. Here in Korea, we saw an example of that. The two Germanys, until they came to an understanding in the 1960s that we are two separate nations and we'll just talk to each other in that way. Until that point, I think they were trying to undermine each other, and so Korea is a very, very keen example of that, where you have two states they share the same minjuk, they share the same ethnic group, but the existence of two states is actually a threat to each other, a continued threat.
Yeah, and the existence of South Korea going on the idea of nation and seeing itself in that light. I believe when President Moon was in Pyongyang at the what's it called, the Arirang Stadium.
I think it's called the Mayday Stadium.
The Mayday Stadium in Pyongyang. They're giving a speech, but talking about the 민족. When he's addressing the North Korean people, 우리 민족은 우수합니다. Our people are good people, but talking about people together and saying 우리 민족은 in that sense. You can't divulge like sort of military secrets and things like that, Charlie. But the North Koreans, like, how are they presented in this way? Are they part of a 민족? Are they enemies of the state? This is a hard one to put you in front of a microphone, but any thoughts on how North Korea fits into this?
So when during the indoctrination process, I the best analogy that I have, because all of my friends, none of them are Korean, so they're very curious about what the Korean army is like, and I tell them the best way to understand that experience is kind of like joining a cult, but you are forced to join the cult. It's not like it's like most people join a cult because, they think it's the right thing to do. Imagine being forced to join a cult. That's what's happening here. And the easiest answer that the army can give you is you're here because of North Korea. Now that's not, it's true to some extent, but it's just a very easy answer. And you just, like, when you hear that, you're like, yeah, that sounds about right. Like, they're ready to go. So we need people who are ready to defend our country.
Right.
But, like, take one random farmer from North Korea. I have nothing against him. Like, he's just a guy who just, happened to be born on the wrong side of the peninsula. So I have nothing against the people. But it's just, it is really unfortunate. And what's really interesting is we share the same history. Like, Korean history goes way back, like I said before. We share the same history up until the point where they say, Kim Il-sung and all of them were born from an egg on top of, the mountain. So until that point, we share the same history. We were one people, like, and then because of some unfortunate circumstances, we have been split along the 38th parallel. I have no hatred towards the North. I also, I don't wish for reunification because what would that really even look like? Like, I don't think I'm educated enough to kind of make a guess of what that would look like politically or realistically. So it is what it is, and the effects of that is, ROKA, the South Korean army.
Yeah. Excellent. Let's take this towards the anti-Japanese. Oh, before I do that, in a 2010 talk for Asia Society, Bryan Myers said this: usually the South Korean left is blamed for the public's lack of patriotism, but it is the right who made blood nationalism a state religion. And so we've talked a little bit already about where the fault lies in what South Korea has done, and how it's made itself, how it's presented itself, the heroes and the images with which it is constructed. And that construction has been a necessity. It has had to go through the process of nation building. Charlie was just saying it didn't ask for this. It didn't ask to be colonized, divided, part of a Cold War. And yet, despite all that, maybe because of all those, I've argued in some cases, it still achieved what it's has done. Nevertheless, those in charge on the left and the right, we sometimes immediately go to the left is the ethno-nationalist, and the right, they're aligned with Tokyo and Washington. Myers is, sort of going at both barrels with both the left and the right here, and saying that the people in charge of Korea have not instilled enough civic nationalism. In the academic literature, you can kind of have civic nationalism cultural nationalism or ethnic nationalism, civic nationalism, what we were talking about earlier, where your nationalism is related to your passport, it's related to your identification, and anybody can be a part of that nation as long as you promise to obey the rules. And you're like, yeah, I'm with you, I can be part of that. It's open. Culturally is a little bit less well known, but that's sort of the Basque, the Catalonian regions, the Celtic regions as well. But the ethnic nationalism, South Korea has still adopted that, and is perhaps saying it's not made enough effort to transform itself over the years on the left and the right into a civic nationalism where Korean people can see themselves as identified with a republic, with a state, rather than these people inside. Comparing the two Koreas, in the book, Bryan Myers says that North Korea is centered around the Kim family, whereas South Korea is centered on the image of the anti-Japanese peace girl wrapped in hat and scarf. Now, this is quite interesting. When I emceed the 85th anniversary of Hanyang University last week, sorry. And it was a fabulous event. And the people that came up to give speeches, this was the 85th anniversary. And Hanyang University is associated with technology, with engineering, with looking forward, the fourth industrial revolution and all of these beautiful buzzwords. And everybody that came up to give a speech talked about Japanese colonization and the scars inflicted on it. And I was just standing there on stage with hundreds of people looking at me as these people gave the speech, and just every one of you is saying that. And I wasn't criticizing them or supporting them. It was just an observation that reinforced this, how deep that kind of anti-Japanese thing is associated with the Korean identity, that instead of celebrating the Republic of Korea, we think of, as we said earlier, the liberation from Japan, and that to be Korean, in a sense, to be South Korean, is defined by anti-Japanese sentiment. And that's, the holidays are based about it, right? And so you have Gwangbokjeol, you have Samil Undong, you have the March 1st holiday as well. And these are holidays that are directed, they're for the Korean people. They're not solely directed at Japan, but it always brings that to mind. And this all predates the start of the Republic. So if you thought talking about North Korea was difficult, the relationship to Japan in South Korea's identity. Jacco, do you have any thoughts on this? That Bryan depicts North Korea centered around the Kim family, South Korea, in his words, peace girl wrapped in the hat and the scarf.
Yeah, for the last 4 years, I've worked for a company that has an office very close to the Japanese embassy, and every Wednesday you hear the shouting and the screaming and the chanting of the anti-Japan demonstration to remember the comfort women, the enforced sex slaves during World War II, because it's really close by. So it's hard to overlook that. It's certainly part of the Korean national ethos. What is it to be Korean? It is to hate Japan.
Can you maybe just say something about the every Wednesday protests? Because I don't get as good a view of them. I don't see them as much. And,
well, I don't see them either. I'm going to turn on the air conditioning because it's getting a bit warm in here. Is it on?
It
looks like it's on, and yet I'm not feeling anything.
We try to turn it up somehow. The conversation's quite spicy, I think. That's why we're getting a bit hot.
I'm starting to sweat here. We're talking about Japan. Look, it's interesting because if you look at numbers of Koreans traveling to Japan, they are higher than ever. Last year, my wife, who's Korean, and we were in Fukuoka, Japan, and it was Samiljeol, and we were with Koreans in Japan, enjoying Japan, and not thinking about Samiljeol for a moment. We weren't hating Japan. We were just there in Japan, having a great time. And it's interesting that, and Bryan says this in his book, of course, that humans are capable of holding contradictory thoughts in their head at the same time. So Koreans can go and enjoy Japan and have a great time there, but at the same time hate everything that Japan stands for politically, especially Japanese history, the Japanese emperor and the imperial project of Japan expanding into East Asia. So those things can be held in the mind at the same time. The demonstrations get quite loud because even though the Japanese embassy has moved on, they still demonstrate in the site where the Japanese embassy was and maybe will be one day in the future. So that's because that's where the statue of the young girl happens to be.
Does that make the selling of or there's a building there that's not used by the Japanese embassy anymore?
The building's been destroyed, so it's an empty lot right now. And as I recall, a couple of years ago, Seoul metropolitan government cancelled the permit for the Japanese embassy to build a new structure on that land, and there's some kind of dispute about whether the Japanese government should have built that land, that house, that building there earlier, and for whatever reason, the Seoul city government has cancelled the permit, so it's temporarily renting a space in a building around the corner from there, a little bit further. I'm sure they can still hear the demonstrations because they use speakers and megaphones. What's been really interesting in the last few years is that there's been counter demonstrations by other Korean groups who go there and say, all the comfort women were voluntary prostitutes or something like, or rather, they don't all say that, but they do say Yoon Mi-hyung stole money from, etc. So there's sort of two competing groups of protesters there in the same space trying to drown each other out with more and more volume. And it gets quite ugly. And I don't think it achieves anything, ultimately. But what it does achieve, of course, is it continues the hatred. It brings on, they're bringing in younger people, bringing in university students to help. And so they continue passing on that hatred to a new generation.
Yeah, it's not intergenerational trauma, but it's intergenerational hatred. Yeah, there's a new term that you've coined. And I really like that you brought up this idea that it's possible to adopt in your mind two contradictory or two conflicting ideas, because Japanese cultural products sometimes, in terms of the animations and the top 5 movies at the cinema, sometimes like there'll be a great fascination for these, and you see every public holiday now Korean people are going to Japan. They're not doing the Chesao, the Challe, the ancestor worship here. They're going to Vietnam, they're going to Japan, they're going to these places. Did you watch the movie Pamyo?
I've not watched that movie.
Because I heard about this new movie, Pamyo. I think it's called Ex-Humor in English, and it became a 천만 영화, like a 10 million people have seen it, 1 in 5, and I was like, okay, I have to go and see it. And when I got halfway through the movie and it took that anti-Japanese turn, I was like, now I know why it's this. Now I know why it's popular, because it's like that. And all the Koreans are like, yes, absolutely. There's definitely both a love of Japanese and the culture, but also this sentiment. Myers says during this book that part of the left, and I stand corrected if I get this wrong, but that some part of the left like North Korea because they perceive it to have taken an anti-Japanese stance stronger than South Korea. So South Korea has adopted a sense of, collaboration or this. It hasn't been strong enough, whereas North Korea was better at eradicating those Japanese influences. That's what Myers says the South Korean left might believe, but does so incorrectly, because Kim Il-sung and the North Korean Republic was very quick to use elements of Japan and Japanese history and culture to build up its own state, and the cult of personality around the Kims. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, and it's certainly one that even before, because you and I have been reading Bryan Myers' blog in English long before this book came out, so we're familiar with some of these ideas, and he has been pointing out for years that indeed the left in South Korea basically impeaches the legitimacy of the Republic of Korea, saying that the Republic of Korea is, from its very beginnings, illegitimate because Lee Seung-man used former Japanese officials and former Koreans who had worked for Japan, former collaborators, he brought them into his government, and he's saying that by doing so, they're trying to basically call the whole Republic of Korea into question. And he links that in his blog to what we saw when President Moon Jae-in was talking about the Republic actually having roots in 1919. By doing that, it's sort of continuing that project of delegitimizing the Republic of Korea that we live in now, that was founded in 1948, by saying, no, actually, it was founded in 1919 in the roots of anti-Japanese sentiment. So, it's more than just liking North Korea. It's actually saying that South Korea is illegitimate and that North Korea is somehow more pure, it's the better Korea because they were better about getting rid of Japanese elements But as Myers points out, and has for years, Kim Il-sung wasn't at all afraid or shy about bringing in Japanese collaborators into his government. I mean, people like Chung-hee, the mother of modern Korean dance. I mean, she had collaborated with the Japanese during the colonial period, and she was a prominent cultural figure in the early years of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So, he makes that point there that North Korea is no purer.
But the idea of it is to some people, and that's a challenge.
Yeah, it's a long-lasting myth or legend that as you say, people they're mistaken, but they hold on to that belief.
We're humans. We do that. I think we do until something sparks us into this. Charlie Eunbi, this you don't have to answer the way Jacco does in any way, but we're talking about Korea's relationship to Japan and how, some Korean people, they like going on holiday there, they like the products, but there's this anti-Japanese sentiment built around the holidays. And to be Korean means to have this kind of, you have to agree with the sentiment. I felt myself here, like having to acknowledge that. I would come from a European perspective and go, no, you guys have got to make up and you've got to be friends, and Willy Brandt gets down on his knees and you apologize and it's all done. But it's kind of different here, I think. How does Japan fit into this story of South Korea?
For me, I also found myself bipolar, because I also went to...
Have you been to Japan?
Yes, last
Did you have a good time?
Last summer, it was really great. But
would you go again?
Definitely.
Okay.
But I mean, I really enjoy traveling to Japan. But I went there with my one of my foreign friends who visited South Korea, and when I told her about Korean history and the Japanese colonization, I also showed the strong anti-Japanese sentiment to her, and then I suddenly came up to her and asked her to travel Japan. But I think it's also because when I was taught about the history that I remember from elementary school, it was there was a very strong hatred towards Japan. And I think sadly what I remember is that our Koreans were learning this Japanese colonization, and obviously we were very mad at what they has done to those Korean people, innocent Korean people. Yeah. And in the meantime, there was Japanese half-blooded student who's a new student who came, and she got lots of hatred from the Koreans. I was not in the same class with her, but I heard those rumors that because she came from Japan, she got lots of hatred, and she hasn't done anything wrong. So I also felt really bad for her, but she also came in the wrong time. That I thought that she came in the wrong timing, and I think it's also important to see her as friend too. Although we were learning this history, it was very unfortunate to see one of the Japanese friend as an enemy.
I can't remember exactly where, but somewhere in the book there, Bryan Myers writes that in many post-colonial states, they actually have, strangely, positive relations with their former colonizers. Right? We see that to some extent in Francophone African countries that have positive relations with France. So Korea seems to be a little bit of an outlier here, that it has such a negative relationship with Japan lasting, well over 70 years after liberation, more so than other countries do.
And maybe that's because there are holidays there and there's media there and it's part of the South Korean identity. Although that's maybe the wrong way to say it, because I get the feeling sometimes that the right wants to be friends with Japan. I wonder, President Yoon at the moment, he's made great efforts to sort of get close to Japan and work with the Japanese government as well as Washington. And I think that was the people of Korea, South Korea, a lot of them weren't ready for that. That's not what we do here. That he wasn't a popular president to begin with. He had his support base, but that certainly didn't endear him to the nation. Maybe the people weren't kind of ready for that. Charlie, the thoughts on Japanese, the holidays here, the feelings, do you...
See, so I don't think it's very different from India and the UK.
Yeah.
You have a really large population of Indians in the UK. And so I think you can coexist, you can appreciate each other's culture but also recognize the history.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what we should be doing. But the Koreans are very hateful people, and they love to hate on shit. So I think that's why, like Jacco just mentioned, that Korea is a bit of an outlier. So having lived in India, so obviously India recognizes, you know, the atrocities that the British Empire committed, but you know, they still want to go to London on holiday, right? Like, we can recognize the fact that you know, what Japan did to us many years ago was a terrible thing. Terrible things happened, but I still want to go to Tokyo, you know, and I think you can do both. But
and this actually, sorry to interrupt there, but 100 years ago, during the colonial period, some of the early Korean nationalists and Korean communists were students in Japan, so they were doing both too, right? They were traveling to Tokyo, but still hating on Japan and wanting for Korean independence. So that's not a new thing, I guess.
Yeah. And so, yeah, Koreans are very bitter. That's
it's the Han, is it?
Yeah,
that's the clip I'll put.
The hate flows through. You can feel it flow through the Koreans whenever they hate on someone. Like, yeah, it's like hatred like no other. It's like you watch a football game, and before the game is on, everyone is like the world's biggest. Like, everyone is like the Korean national team's biggest fan. They're like, oh, Son Heung-min and all these players are going to do so great.
Yeah.
We tie with Thailand one time, and you go on the Instagram comments, and they are ripping apart the entire roster. Their mothers, their wives, their girlfriends, weird scandals. Like, weird scandals about like how this guy had like a sex tape with someone, and they're making fun of the size of his penis. Because he couldn't score a goal. But and I was upset because, you know, like, we should have won that game. But Koreans are very quick to, you know, they love to go to the internet and just start talking shit the moment they get the chance to do so. And same thing with Japan. It's just unending. And that's why you still have, there's so much controversy about Japan online, even to this day, and it's not going to stop. It's just going to go on and on, even though this hatred will be coming from generations that had nothing to do with the Japanese people who were, you know.
It's getting stronger. You would think it would go away
weird
as time passes, but the anti-Japanese sentiment. It was only a few years ago, remember, guys, that you would walk into a supermarket and there would be No Japan posters over Home Plus and E-Mart, like the Walmarts of South Korea. They would have these No Japan things. When Welcome to My Dong Bart came to speak with me here, he brought with him 4 cans of Heineken, and he said to me before he put he said to me before he put them down, I normally drink Asahi or Sapporo, but I couldn't do that because you're videoing it. And he was careful of that, though, but you see it sort of publicly, and it's out there, and it's definitely something to behold. Before one of the South Korean matches at the Olympic Stadium when they were playing Japan, they unfurled a huge banner of An Jong-gun, who is the Korean hero who does the assassination.
He shot Ito Hirobumi.
Yes, and they unveil this big poster of him. It's really here. Just on India, I want to say one thing about colonization, but just before that, on India-Britain relations, there was a fabulous speech. It was either at Oxford or Cambridge, forgive me for not remembering, by Dr. Shashi Tharoor. And he said that in terms of reparations, he would like Britain to pay £1. Because it would be symbolic, because no other amount of money could deal with this. You couldn't, and he played out how much it would be or not, but it shouldn't be nothing. And it shouldn't be real, but it should be this symbolic £1 that then we can move on. And it was a very compelling argument at the start of that speech. And then I'll move to colonization. He says, I come from the Henry VIII line of public speaking, which is to say, I've forgotten the line. Let's move on to colonization. And the Sashi Tharo one will come to me and I'll give it to you. Not all colonization is the same, Jacco. That sometimes when you were talking about France and its colonies, Britain and its colonies, it's sometimes worse to be colonized by those close to you.
Well, let's think about Britain and Ireland for a moment there.
Yes,
Now,
exactly.
Britain did some horrible things in Ireland over the centuries. But I think Ireland fits firmly into that group of countries that now has a positive relationship with its former colonizer. That you don't see, at least I'm not aware of, attempts to whip up anti-British hatred throughout Irish society. Of course, there are plenty of Irish people who have a grudge against the British for being colonizers, and I'm not saying that they've forgotten that by any means. No, but to suggest that politicians in Ireland still do that, I don't see it. Whereas in Korea, if you're a politician, I'm sorry, Minjudang, but if you're from the Minjudang and you're a politician and you want to get some support, whip up some anti-Japanese hatred. That'll always help.
Yeah.
It's the message that never stops selling in a way that it stopped selling in Ireland a long time ago.
Yeah. And it's still part of civic discourse, public discourse. You can say it and you won't, because I think you're right to say that in Ireland people will feel that, but you can't really say that in public. You say it after a few pints in the pub, but elected leaders and officials shouldn't be doing that. I come from the Henry VIII School of Public Speaking. As Henry VIII said to his wife, "I won't keep you long." That was I got there in the end. Japan is something I think here we could talk about a lot. One of the things that I really agreed with Bryan on this is about Park Chung-hee. Well, guys, if you thought this conversation was going to be easy, we're going from North Korea to Japan to Park Chung-hee. We can go to the things that you want to do as well. The Sonhae Doktaeja, this benevolent dictator. Myers makes an assertion that's correct to my own experiences, actually, teaching international and Korean students here. In Chapter 7, he says that his students from places such as Uzbekistan respect Park Chung-hee for the development he brought to the country as a benevolent dictator, while American students, often raised on a Bruce Cummings-led narrative, are quick to dismiss him as a dictator guilty of human rights abuses. And I've had students from Indonesia, not all of them, I'm generalizing, but it's over many years, students from Indonesia, students from Vietnam, students from Kazakhstan, and they say, I wish we had a Park Chung-hee. Because they look at the country here and what has been built and they say, well, we had a dictator, but we didn't have that dictator. And many countries are going to have one, but they didn't have him. And, is Park Chung-hee a hero of the Republic? Because in 1960, the majority of South Korea is agricultural. It's working on farms. It's a very poor nation in the grand scheme of things, and it's been dragged kicking and screaming into modernity. There was a lot of missteps along the way, and there was a lot of heavy-handed behavior, definitely. But there's two perspectives on Park Chung-hee, and one is this great respect that comes from less developed nations and say, look what this guy did. And the other is, no, human rights, this is unacceptable, and to look down. And so that also, South Korea's a hero of the Republic. It's hard to frame him like that, but some people will see it like that. I certainly see international students that are like that. They almost want to sort of take that model back to their own countries and let's do it like this. Of course, it won't work, but what Bryan was saying in Chapter 7 about Park Chung-hee as a benevolent dictator seen by some as a hero and by others from other countries with different narratives I really rang true with me and my experiences. I think he was on point with that your vision of Park Chung-hee is determined by your current identity and where you're from and the narrative. And today, if South Korean young people are raised on identity and morality, and the morality today amongst young people is very kind of progressive. The students, by the way, from Indonesia and that, they'll look at Koreans and go, wow, you guys are so Western and progressive. And the students from Germany and goes, oh, you guys are a bit behind, right? You're very Asian. And so I think it's hard now for Koreans to look at Park Chung-hee and go, yeah, he did well, because our whole framework and mind has changed, that what Park Chung-hee did then would never fly today. So it's hard to see him in that light as the benevolent dictator, a hero of the Republic, perhaps. Hard to see.
But is there such a thing? Like that was my main question.
Yeah.
it's like a bit oxymoronic in nature.
Yeah.
The
benevolent
benign,
dictator.
the benign dictator. So the way I see it is, he was like kind of very thing about the media, right? Like he wanted complete control over it, and he wanted to like be in office for life. Like he wanted to be the one to bring change, but he did. So it's kind of like, and yes, like there were some, you know, very shitty things that happened, but someone had to, you know, take Korea from, you know, being in the bottom to where it is now. And this is gonna be very controversial and crazy to say, but
get ready, Instagrammers.
I would say there will be no Blackpink or BTS without Park Chung-hee. So everyone should recognize the fact that certain sacrifices have to be made. And Korea is, it's far from being a perfect country, but it's come a long way. And the sacrifices that were made, yes, they were tragic, but I would go so far as to say that they were necessary sacrifices if we want to appreciate and live in the developed country that we live in right now.
Yeah. Let's also try to put this on the record that we've said heavy-handed, a lot of shitty things happened and such forth. We shouldn't be under the illusion that this was Chairman Mao's great leap forward, or Pol Pot and what he was doing with intellectuals. There wasn't, as far as I know, and I'll stand to be corrected on this, there wasn't the mass execution of groups of people. There wasn't sort of massacres taking place. Yes, it was very handed. Jacco, you just breathed in. Am I wrong on that?
No, I was thinking about sort of the counter example of, I think it was in Zimbabwe where Mugabe, he did go in and kill groups of people from other tribes that weren't aligned with his own. And so thinking how fortunate we are here in Korea that precisely that did not happen here in Korea. I mean, back in when I was living in Australia in the early 2000s, I knew a very progressive South Korean minister of religion who was very sympathetic towards North Korea and very down on Park Chung-hee and right-wing presidents in Korea. And so when when we spoke about the numbers of political prisoners in North Korea, which already then were said to be about 250,000 people, Mark, he said, well, no, I can't believe that, because even in the worst excesses of South Korea under the military dictatorships, there were never more than 25,000 political prisoners at one time, and I just can't believe that North Korea would be worse than that. So it must be about the same level. That was his metric. So his metric was, if South Korea was this bad, North Korea couldn't be any worse, even in its worst excesses. So you're right. That I mean, if you were to tally up all the bad things that Park Chung-hee and John Doo-hwan, if we're going to talk about that period, did.
John Doo-hwan has Gwangju in there as well, I think, so that's very different. But
the sum total of all the shitty dictatorial things that were done in Korea, if you were to rank all of the dictators in the world, South Korea would come pretty low in terms of how bad the dictator. Wouldn't you think? You've already mentioned China, the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution.
That's what I was thinking.
Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people either lost their jobs or their lives and their livelihoods. There's so many bad examples of dictatorship around the world. It's never a good thing. I'll condemn bad things when I see it, but I agree with Charles that the South Korea that we see today, the Republic of Korea that we live in today, wouldn't be the same as it is right now, almost at the same level of Japan in terms of GDP per capita. And I know it's a purely economic metric, but we wouldn't be living the kind of lives that we're living right now if it hadn't been for Park Chung-hee. And I'm not going to call him a hero because he did shitty things too, but Korea's here now because of what it went through then. Agreed or disagree? What do you think, Eunbi?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think it's true that although because of his dictatorship, there has been lots of people who were abused with their human rights, but as you already mentioned, Korea has developed rapidly because of his should I call it help? because of its ruling. And yet, from 한강의 기적 and 새마을운동, from
the miracle in the River Han.
Exactly.
And the New Villages movement, the Semal movement, which other countries now come to study. And I think, going back to what you said earlier, I wonder if some of those countries who are now studying the Semal-undong, that I wonder if some of them are hoping, gee, I wish we could bring back a Park Chung-hee. I mean, the Semal-undong ideas are nice, but could we also bring back this kind of leadership? Sorry to interrupt, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I'm not sure if I would like this dictatorship kind of thing back to Korea right now, but
no, please, no.
Yes,
we've had enough.
Exactly, I think we had enough, and from that sacrifice, thankfully, I think Korea has developed a lot.
Yeah, you know, there's that. It's a funny saying or metaphor. You can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. Now, that does sound like the ends justify the means, and I'm careful not to do that. But if you ask the question, okay, here are the broken eggs, where's your omelette? In South Korea, it's very clear, this society we're living in today, this is the omelette. Now, in many other countries where they've had dictatorships, you can't find any omelette. You can find lots of broken eggs, you just can't find an omelette.
I tell that story in my class. That's weird. I've never told you that. That I've understood that story as George Orwell being a massive critic of the Soviet Union and the gulags there. A member of the Soviet Union comes over to the United Kingdom, he's giving a speech, and George Orwell says to the ambassador, how would you explain the gulags, the political prisons and the mass oppression? Yep. The Soviet responds, well, Mr. Orwell, I won't do it any more than that, but to make an omelette, you have to break a few eggs, to which George Orwell replies, where's the omelette? Yeah. And South Korea has this omelette. Yeah. It's right here, you can see it.
Now, North Korea, which also had a dictatorship, there's no doubt about that, where's its omelette? Yeah. People are still going without food there.
I have a stupid question about the New Village movement. I'm not sure if any of you know it. Is the symbol of that the green kind of leaf? I'm seeing that more and more in Gangwon, though. Oh. I'm seeing that pop up because I saw it and I'm like, that's the Seoul-undong like symbol, and I'm seeing parts of it crop up again, and I'm not used to seeing it in modern life as I drive around in my car listening to YouTube. It's something I associate with history and the past, and
it still exists.
It still exists, but I'm beginning to see it around. I'm not sure if that's just a cognitive bias, but yeah. There it is. And Park Chung-hee, when he normalized relations with Japan in 1965, too much protest, got a lot of money from Japan. My memory is going to say something like $500 million. I'm not sure if that's correct.
Yeah, some were purely aid, and some were what they call soft loans, loans that may not be repaid.
Yeah, and he didn't put all that money in his pocket, as I understand. He built the Seoul to Busan expressway through much hard effort, because sometimes I remember driving through the countryside with my mum and my brother, and they're like, did they just build through these mountains? Because when you go in South Korea, you drive out to the East Coast, you drive south, you go through a mountain, and then 10 seconds later, you go through another mountain, and you go through another mountain. Imagine doing that in the mid-60s. And that's what they did. Park Chung-hee could have built big statues of himself all around the country, but he didn't. He didn't put himself on the currency either. Charlie doesn't have a Park Chung-hee tattoo yet.
Not yet. I'll think about it.
Hold on for that. Just keep thinking. Yeah, no, exactly. One of the favourite people I've met in South Korea, the late Peter Bartholomew, when he was living in Kyunghoon in the late 1960s, a train journey from Kyunghoon to Seoul was an overnight trip.
Wow. You get there in 2.5 hours today. Something like that.
2 hours.
There were no tunnels through mountains back then.
Yeah. Time and space was real. The land was there, the mountains. So this is something that Myers was saying about the benevolent dictator and the views of him being shaped by different things. An American, I'm going to go to this one that is maybe not of interest as much to Charlie and Eunbi, but this was about Bryan Myers' position against Bruce Cummings and Victor Cha. Now,
Charles Armstrong.
And Charles Armstrong, Charles Armstrong is a different story, but Bruce Cummings, Korea's place in the sun, the origins of the Korean War, a very well-known figure in Korean studies. A lot of people doing Korean studies will read Korea's Place in the Sun. I've had to read it as part of my thing. And Bruce Cummings is seen as the progressive. He's seen as the one that brings the light and has the hard, critical, biting views that nobody wants to see. In this book, Myers labels him a moralist rather than a historian, saying that rather than being a brave liberal researcher, he is a neoliberal insider who receives US funding and can't speak Korean. And when I read that, I had to put it down. I actually took a photo and sent it to somebody. I was like, this is not just about Korean politics, but this is about how the narrative of the Korean nation is being written, is being disseminated. It's Gramscian. He's talking about hegemony and control of media, that if you go into a Korea study program and there's all of this funding and there's this money, that you're going to get the Cummings narrative, or you're going to get a certain narrative that is funded, that is intentional, and it's not as liberal as it may seem. In some senses, it's very quick to defend North Korea at every possible angle. He talks about, Bruce Cummings, I believe, not mentioning famines and such forth in North Korea, but that will criticize South Korea at every turn. Yeah. So South Korea, I believe, Myers is saying, is judged according to objective standards. Look, you did this wrong. This is bad. You did this wrong. Whereas North Korea is given like relative standards. Well, you know, we can understand that you did that. You're that kind of state. So there's almost like this personal battle between two individuals, I think, where he's attacking a large figure and saying that there's this hegemonic control of media by people that might seem progressive on the outside, but when you actually look at them, as I said, that's how he labels them. And when I read that, I was like, this is quite. I didn't expect to read it in a book like this. You don't normally read that in a history book. This Gramscian control of media.
Myers has been a critic of Bruce Cummings, the revisionist scholar, for a long time. Yeah. At least since he wrote in The Atlantic back in 2004. That's 20 years ago already. So he's been a critic of him for many years, and so I was not at all surprised to see Cummings pop up in the book. I thought Cummings received a bit more attention than he probably deserved in this book, because it's mostly about South Korea rather than about North Korea or origin of the Korean War. But I wasn't surprised to see him here. Yeah.
But that's it. Maybe let's give Charlie or Eunbi some on this. How do you feel about this book being written by, like, do you get a sense of who this person is? So history is written by a historian. Like, when you read this, did you become curious about the person Bryan Myers, or you're reading a book about Korean politics and history by a foreigner? Did that ever strike you at any moment? Was that weird?
Thank you. For me, by reading this book, I definitely thought that I need more background information to understand Korean. And by reading this book, I was like, is it okay to read a historical book from the foreigner writer before I read, those historical books written by the Korean historians? So, but I also found it interesting that I think it gave me views to look at Korea. For example, the lack of national 국가주의.
State nationalism, for example. And I think it was also, I was able to look at Korea with unbiased stereotypes, because, yes.
Do you think foreigners are unbiased?
I don't think
no, I'm not criticizing. Yeah.
Yes, I was able to see it from the foreigners' view and how they look at Korea.
Yeah. Because I think history is very political in South Korea. Whether you think it's 1919 or 1945 or 1948, you can place somebody on the political spectrum by asking them a question. Right? And according to the number that they give you in response, and this is true in other countries as well, it's not just Korea, but you can find what side of the line they come on. History is not a unified subject here, and that's why they still fight over the textbooks and over the narrative. And I think that's what Bryan is kind of alluding to here. Charlie, you told me in class, or you asked me in class once, did he really write this? Any thoughts on the person that you've read here? Or?
So it's not really like a textbook, right? There is a personal touch to this book, and he isn't afraid to share his opinions. And I think that actually kind of made the book more interesting to read, because he's not trying to tell you like this is how it is, but it's very clear that this is how he views it and
how he experienced it.
Right. So it is there is some subjectivity to what he is saying, but history should be objective, but how often is it really objective, right? So like I said, I think the main point that I really respect is that it's written in Korean, right? It's not it would have been so much easier to write this in English, but to clearly, like, if we question why is this in Korean, like why is the title in Korean, why is everything in Korean, it's because he wants a message to be thrown out there, and the target audience is clearly the Korean people, and the book begins and ends with him emphasizing the fact that I may be a foreigner, and I think he's somewhat humble. He says, I also acknowledge the fact that I don't know a lot of things, but you may view me as a foreigner who's just talking about Korean politics and Korean history. But the question, like, then he poses the question, like, why should you listen to me? And so when I read that, I'm also wondering, why should I listen to you? Like, a white man, you're not, like, you may have lived in Korea, but what real authority do you have? But I think the moment he said, because I'm willing, like, I'm taking a chance, like, I'm talking about things that you guys aren't willing to talk about, like, the Korean people aren't interested. And when we began this podcast, people don't know that it's 1948, right?
The founding of the Republic.
Right.
Not when we began this podcast.
So he's willing to talk about it. And if he's willing to talk about it as a foreigner who's writing in our language, then I think we should be willing to listen. And like I said, I don't agree with everything, but I really do think it's a very important piece of literature. And I think we need more things like this. Like, Koreans seem to believe that this is our country, our land, like everything is us, everything is uri, right? And there seems to be this, like, division of, like, Koreans being one pure race, right? The pure race, the 민족. That division, that line needs to be blurred, because Korea is now a developed country. We are experiencing globalization. Korea is, like, it's very, like, look at the rate of modernization. You've been here since 1995, right?
96.
96. Okay.
With a few years away for good behavior.
Right. So how fast do you think the rate of development in Korea, like how quickly has Korea become a modern society? How do you feel about it? Oh,
it's dizzyingly fast. You go away and you come back 6 months later and your favorite restaurant is gone. There's a new building there. It's happening very quickly. Sometimes too quickly. Yeah.
It's, like, this isn't, like, development at an exponential pace, right? So
I think it's unprecedented almost anywhere in the world.
Right.
Have you ever had the experience of meeting a Korean War veteran who was here in the 1950s?
No.
So I was lucky enough to meet several of them, and they come back and they don't believe what they're seeing, because in the 1950s in Busan, there was a refugee village on the mountain there. People were living in ration crates and cardboard boxes, basically. It was panjacheon. It was shanty towns all across the country, or at least in the large cities everywhere. And now they come and they see this glittering city with skyscrapers and huge LED screens, and they don't believe what they're seeing.
And that's testament to what Korea has done. I completely. Before you finish, I would love to hear, before we finish today, what you disagree with, if there is something. Because, we've talked about some of the things. I've said some of the bits I agree with him. I'd also like to hear from Jacco about the amount of Myers there is in this, because that's something that you've brought up. I heard Bryan speak at a Royal Asiatic Society colloquium event a few months ago. I was there with Colin Marshall and Chris Truter and some other people, Matt Van Valkenburg. And during that talk, Bryan, the author of this book, he said very interesting thing to me at the time, which was, do you know why so many professors these days focus on Hallyu and K-pop and Blackpink and soft power? He said the reason is because if you do actual Korean history or Korean politics, you're going to get in trouble. Because if you actually do it like an academic or like a historian and you go after what you're meant to go after, you're going to find yourself coming up against some very, you know, Charlie's talked about the feelings here, and we know that's why people are gravitating towards the Blackpinks and the BTSs, and we're well beyond that now, but because it's generally a little bit safer. But if you go after the actual history and politics, and this is with no disrespect, but like if I ask Korean people, what do you think Park Chung-hee then? Or what about this? Really important things in the Republic. A lot of Korean people, young Korean people that I interact with will go, and some of it's a lack of knowledge, and some of it's a lack of confidence, and some of it's a lack of, well, what am I meant to say actually? Should I say this or should I say that? I don't know. And it's their country. And I think you're right, Charlie, to say, why should you listen to Bryan? But at least it makes you start thinking about who you should listen to and where you should start listening. The amount of Myers in this, or anywhere you wanted to go.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, from my memory of reading the book there, the first time that Bryan set foot in Korea was 1984.
Yeah, that's
and this book is organized historically. It starts off with the, sort of chapter. So chapter 4 is basically, it's from the liberation, and then you're walking through Lee Seung-man and then Park Chung-hee. So it's historically organized, chapter by chapter. Yeah. And then as he appears in the book in 1984, there's more and more of Bryan in each chapter, because there's more and more anecdotes of his own life. What did he observe? What did he see in the 80s, in the 90s, and the 2000s? And so that makes it an interesting, more interesting narrative-wise, because there's a lot of the author in it. You know, it's a subjective book. It's not trying to be an academic work, but it does situate itself somewhere between academic and a simple book of essays, because it's got a lot of footnotes in here. It's got a list of references at the back. So yeah, it's maybe a new genre to itself. I'm not sure what you would call it, but it's not trying to be a textbook or an essay book, but it's somewhere in between.
I want to say, and Charlie said that he kind of resonated with those anecdotes, and maybe that's part of it. What I've started doing in the last couple of semesters at university is when I introduce certain topics, I often start with a TMI part or something like this, and I put photos of me up when I was in my 20s, or how I grew up, why my views of women and feminism, how they've been affected by growing up with my grandmother and Queen Elizabeth II and Margaret Thatcher. I'm not some objective, rational thing, that I've been informed by my experiences. And I remember reading the start of this and going, wow, there's a lot of Myers. He's talking about he's a vegetarian, and then he's doing this. And he says, if I was in Europe, I would be seen as a progressive, but here I'm seen as a right-wing apologist and things like this. And it was very... I remember asking Colin Marshall when we were speaking about it, you were there at the pub that night, Charlie, and I was like, is he doing that because this is a Korean book and that's what Korean people expect? They expect a little bit of this humble, here I am, humility, or is it part of a new movement? Is it just the way it came out? I'm not quite sure. I want to make this point about time. He says, page 16, 17, that Koreans struggle with chronological order, that Western people see history as a long story, whereas Korean people see it as a series of touching events. So they go from this one to this one. And so when they don't know when the founding of the Republic is and when this comes and why this happens, it's a cultural rather than an intelligence difference. It's not that Korean people don't know this, but Bryan here is suggesting that the Korean way of telling history is not chronological, that there's a more holistic view. And
he gives a very specific example, doesn't he, of one book where it's springing back and forth between I can't find the exact quote now, but it's being completely non-chronological. Oh, here we go. I think it's there. In one paragraph, it starts with a discussion about 1987, and then the next paragraph to 1982, and then the following paragraph, 1979. That kind of way of looking at things. So it's in an ahistorical or at least an anachronistic way,
or ways that we're not used to from a Western perspective. I remember when I reviewed the book *The Sister* by, his name has escaped me, Sung-yoon.
I don't know.
A gentleman, professor in the United States, a Korean gentleman, but he reviewed he wrote the book on the sister, Kim Yo-jung.
Oh, right. The professor at Tufts University.
Yes, that's correct.
Song-yoon Lee, I think.
Thank you very much, Song-yoon Lee. I apologize for getting the name wrong, but in that I said the chronology, that it's all over the place. He's going from here to here, from here to here, and I criticized it for that at the time. And then after reading this part from Myers, I was like, that's kind of interesting. Maybe there's something in that where we see history differently. One is this long line of events, like from 0 AD to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we count up in this linear Western fashion. And in Korea, there's an expression, 감옥이 날개, 배 떨어진다. What's the correct, is that close?
Yes,
감옥이 날개,
까마귀 날짜
날짜, 배 떨어진다. When the crow flies, the pear drops. Right? And so when these two things happen, they're not related to each other. There's no cause and effect. And somebody asked me, like, what's the English version of this? And I asked a chat room of 400 British people, what's the equivalent of when the crow flies, the pear drops? And I was like, nobody could think of one. And it was these series of unrelated events. I thought Bryan was doing something very interesting by talking about how people see time, how we approach it. And maybe it's as he says, a cultural rather than intellectual difference that we come up with these. That was interesting to me. Guys, there's just a couple of things that I want to go. We've been going for a while. Does anyone else want to throw a topic out there before I move on?
A topic?
The democracy, the fifth column, the 애국심. I've got all of these.
And comparing Korea to Germany.
Yeah, okay. Well, South Korean left loved North Korea. I think I asked Charlie, what do you disagree with? And, Bryan has done this thing about where in South Korea there's a lot of underground love for Kim Il-sung. And this is the feeling I get. I may be interpreting him wrong, but that in South Korea there's this kind of fifth column. There's this they said Kim Il-sung manse here, and they'll go through this in the streets openly praising Kim Jong-il when the 무정화 꽃이 피었습니다. When the flower chrysanthemum blossoms.
Rose of Sharon.
I just said that. Yeah, when the Rose of Sharon blossoms. I'm very sorry. Now, I'm not sure. I think I get the feeling that he's over-exaggerating domestic South Korean love for North Korean leader. I think it's probably worth asking on what grounds every left South Korean president, Kim Dae-jung, Roh Moo-hyun, Moon Jae-in, they've all gone to Pyongyang. I don't think it's out of love and adoration. I think it's more sort of maybe realpolitik or getting legitimacy from the voters. We'll do that. But I'm not sure of Myers' assertion that there's the left love North Korea and there's a fifth column here. That's my...
Well, I think there's another way of looking at it. You can say that it's that the left, it's not that they love, but that they find a way to apologize for everything that North Korea does.
Okay.
That they find a way to be soft on North Korea every time. Now, if looking at it objectively or from outside Korea, it seems ridiculous that in 2024, people who have family members on the other side of the border still cannot send a letter or make a phone call or type an email. That the two Koreas both have laws that forbid people-to-people contact. Right? The National Security Act here in South Korea, that's been valid since 1949, forbids South Koreans to have contact with North Koreans without specific permission from the government. So traveling to North Korea, writing to a North Korean, meeting a North Korean in a third country, technically these things can all be illegal. Same in North Korea. It just seems ridiculous that we don't have any postal exchange. Whereas in Germany, right up until 1989, you were able to send a letter to your relative on the other side of the border. Now, sure, those letters were read, they were opened, there was probably some censorship going on there, there was control, but at least you could contact people. and there hasn't been on the most basic level. And I think that's one of the, I mean, when you find that there are people like Peng Nak-chung who are very bullish on the idea of there being a Korean confederacy, you think, hang on, we haven't even got the most basic of things yet, like a postal exchange, like... Well, I come back to it, like a postal exchange. It just seems so basic to not even have that.
Yeah.
How can you talk about things like economic cooperation or building a confederacy? And of course, the separated family reunions, what a joke. When was the last separated family reunion that we had between the two Koreas? If North Korea were serious about it, and if the South Korean government were really passionate about this project, they would have tried their hardest to regularize family exchanges, family meetings decades ago. And yet we see, you know, at best I think there were 10, maybe 12 rounds of reunions, and those reunions are, here's a few hours to have a meal together and then get back on the bus and say goodbye and you'll never see each other again. That's the end of your life.
And we really want to wait for the crying photos, this like tragedy porn that we're going to put up to get it. That's what people want from it.
Cameras around,
Yeah, the cameras.
No, so I think it's not so much that that there's a large number of people in South Korea who love Kim Il-sung, but they find a way to make excuses for bad behavior by North Korea. And Myers is concerned, and this is where I'm not sure, I want to see more evidence here, that Myers is concerned that South Koreans could be led blindfolded into a relationship with North Korea that they will later reject, will later regret. So he's worried that this idea of a confederation or a low-level federation between North and South Korea, that suddenly you could find yourself in a situation where North Korea is making demands upon South Korea and says, you pay us more money, you stop talking to America, send the American troops home, that kind of thing, and that South Koreans will regret it. Some of them will then turn up in front of the US Embassy calling for the US to come in and help again, and the Americans may turn around and say, well, we're not so interested anymore. I mean, it's an interesting scenario. It would make a great movie or a novel, but I don't know if there's enough evidence to say that Korea is actually... I mean, in the 5 years of the Moon Jae-in administration, I didn't see any single steps towards a confederacy actually being built or a federation. Just as I have some people who I know back in the Netherlands who are concerned about the Islamization of Europe. In the last 20 years, I can't really see that much movement in that direction either. You know? So I see people concerned about it, but I don't really see a lot of change in that direction.
I remember seeing President Moon's plans for the trains, which was a takeover from Kim Dae-jung's plans as well, for the trains to go up the east and west coast and to link them and to go through a North Korean corridor into it. But I agree with you on that 5-year thing. I think you make a beautiful statement about this has got to start with people-to-people contact. Why can't people contact each other? Why can't they write a letter? It's not about these grand dreams of unification or the fear of confederacy. These are far too big, and they're well beyond the ken of normal human beings. But what we can do is we can talk to people and we can feel them and we can see them, and yet that very basic thing is denied. And just as when Bryan says towards the end something along the lines of 내가 대한민국을 많은 한국인보다 더 높은 평가하는, I value Myers is saying that he values South Korea more than the average citizen. You know, hearing what you say there, Jacco, is again another fascinating thing, because you're valuing this connection between people that's otherwise missed.
And in that same chapter 20, he says you have a country, a republic, which fought back invasion by a totalitarian enemy and created this wonderful economic growth. Now, if that's a country that doesn't deserve love, then what country does? Right? That the Republic of Korea deserves more love than so many other nations, just based on results alone.
That's the title of the book.
Yeah, The Unloved Republic.
Yeah. It's a nice translation on the fly, by the way, sir.
Oh, no, I think he used it as a title at his talk back in 2010.
No, what you just did reading from there.
See.
Yes. I'm not congratulating you on translating. Guys, give me some final thoughts on this book, this process. It doesn't have to be deep. It can be whatever you want. But I think, we've not done every part of this book, but I think we've talked around it enough to at least make people aware of what Bryan is doing. Give us give us some closing thoughts on this. Charlie, you wanna go first?
So just going back to what I said before about how, Koreans say 예민해 is the word, right? How sensitive Koreans are about outsiders talking about Korean politics and Korean history. This is not in support of Bryan Myers. It's true that a lot of Koreans just don't know basic Korean history, and it's difficult. I was also a part of that group, but I'm obviously I studied it in university, so now I know a little bit. But there's so much to be studied, and there's so much that that Koreans don't know that maybe we should, because it is an important part of our history. And I think what he's doing and what other people, I think what's happening right now, what we're doing, we're talking about it. And so it shouldn't matter whether the person talking about Korean politics is Korean, whether they've been to the army, or whether they're you, or whoever listens to this and has an opinion about it and has something to say on the subject in the comment section. Just you share ideas and you talk about it, because at least we're willing to do so. And that's his point, is that I'm willing to talk about the things that you guys aren't, so you guys should at least be willing to listen. And so we are here, and we're here to talk about it. So I think more people should be willing to listen. And at the end of the day, these are all just his idea of what Korea is, right? It's through the lens of Bryan Myers. And obviously you've spent a lot of time in Korea, right? So you obviously have your idea of what Korea is as a nation, and you too, and us as Korean citizens, we may have differing ideas and opinions of what Korea is, but we need to move away from this idea of the one 민족, the pure race. This idea of 우리 should not be limited to the Korean people. Like Jonathan can be 우리, and maybe a lot of people are now moving towards that view, but this idea of 우리 isn't just the Korean people. Like we're all people at the end of the day, and so I think that's what I take away from this book. And overall, I really did enjoy it. I think it's worth a read, whether you agree with it, with the ideas presented in the book or not. Whoever is listening to this, it definitely is worth a read.
Well said, Charlie. One of the more controversial articles that I wrote recently was, "Can Korea have an ethnic revolution?" Very dodgy title, and it brought back a lot of support, but also a lot of blowback from some Korean people, because I said Korea successfully had 3 revolutions thus far. It first had an economic revolution. It went from dirt poor to very rich, and then it had a political revolution. It went from dictatorship to democracy, and these are genuine revolutions from this end to that. Then it had a cultural revolution. It went from Korea being, nobody wanted Korea. Korea meant cheap. And now if you put a K in front of everything, wow, Korea's cool. It's had 3 successful revolutions in the last 50 odd years. And that's incredible. The next one, I'm not saying it has to do it, but I questioned, can it have an ethnic revolution? It's the wrong title, but I just used it because it was punchy. But can it have a revolution in terms of what it means to be Korean? I'm not saying it should or it will, but I put that out there, that it's done 3 thus far. And so if it did happen in the future, it wouldn't surprise me, because very little surprises me in much of what Korea is capable of. And I think that's to what you're saying there, Charlie, in terms of, I've also got this question of, if we all wrote our own book on Korea, what would our titles be? Because we all see Korea differently. And this is how Bryan sees it. This 사랑받지 못하는 공화국, the Unloved Republic. And our books would be different. Not better or worse, but different. You put them all together, you'd have something. Eunbi, you've had to read some of this book. This book, what's going on for you? Any final words?
For me, it was also pretty new, because I think since the Korean history textbook, I think it was my first time actually reading it by myself. and like without anyone like forcing me to read it. And it was also pretty new for me to learn. Like, it is very new. First of all, because I never really talked about those political issues with any of like people around me. For example, I think, as you said, it suddenly became a controversial thing to even talk about it or even mention about it. And so I don't know what my friends think of those histories. And even with my family, it is usually my grandfather who I can talk about this with freely. And it also left me with some questions about how Korea was like relying on the US and how it might be risky in the future. And I also thought what I'm supposed to do as a Korean citizen. And perhaps I thought that I definitely need to have much more enough backgrounds in order to even talk about it with anyone. So I think, yeah, I need to gain some more knowledge too.
I think it's very important what you said, Eunbi, and I think it's important that people remember that you've not read these or had these conversations before. Korean people don't really sit around and have these conversations. I'm generalizing 50 million people. Old people might talk about politics, like you said, your grandfather or grandmother, but generally young people in school and classes, and you're not talking about this stuff, and yet it's so important. And so as you're sitting here, it's completely new for you, I guess, isn't it? You're trying to work out, like, Park Chung-hee, is that good kind of, we want answers, and they're difficult, but you have to find your answers.
Exactly.
I think people should read this book a lot more. I've been sad to I've been unable to find any reviews of it in the South Korean media or any mention of it in the South Korean media, and that makes me sad. I'm disappointed in it. I'd like to see more people read it, discuss it, love it or hate it, at least read it and then talk about it, as Charlie says, right?
Yeah.
You find your own opinion, but engage with the ideas, because I've not seen anything about Korea written in this way with these ideas before. So whatever people think about it, at least go out and have a look at the book and see what you make of it. And you know, I wish that Bryan would do a few more interviews in Korean television, perhaps, and that might get a bit of a buzz happening around the book. Maybe this podcast will as well. We hope so, or at least I do. And then another final thought: coming back to the word "gonghwaguk." South Koreans tend not to say "우리 공화국."
Yeah.
They say "우리 나라." They don't say "우리 공화국." North Koreans say "우리 공화국."
Yeah.
I wonder, historically, and we're too young to know, did South Koreans in the first, second, third, fourth republic, did they say "우리 공화국," or have South Koreans never said this since 1948? I don't know what the answer is. Do you happen to know? Have you ever heard anyone say that?
No, and I don't think previous generations would have either.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my opinion, but I just can't picture it happening.
And I think that the word "공화국" in South Korea has been tainted a little bit. You know that South Koreans are familiar, or at least older South Koreans are familiar with the different generations of iterations of the 공화국, the 제1 공화국, 제2, 제3, 제4 공화국. So, and these were parts of South Korean history that are not the best and brightest, because you know these are constitutions that were rewritten by dictators at times, and so I think there's a reluctance to use that word "공화국," partly because it's tainted by that association with these ever-changing constitutions and presidents for life kind of thing. And I wonder whether that's maybe an answer why the word is so unloved, but it doesn't answer why the state should be so unloved. I think the state deserves the loyalty of its people in every country, in every state. I mean, otherwise, why be a state? Why not just, you know, have the president resign and just join the next country?
you hippie, Jacco. No borders, Mr. Zwetsloot. I think it's a very important point that you make about the republic, the word republic, or being tainted or being associated with periods of great flux and change and nothing stable. It seemed very written in that way. I had a similar question the other day. Is what did people in the 1700s call the Joseon dynasty?
Did they talk about the state? Unless they were the Korean in a village in Jeollado, if they weren't a government official, did they talk about the nation, or did they just talk about their village and occasionally the king?
Yeah.
That's, I'm not sure about that. But I would encourage both Eunbi and Charlie to popularize the phrase 우리 공화국, use it. Obviously, David and I, it's forbidden for us. We can't possibly say it because we are not citizens. We are not 공민. We're not citizens of the 공화국. We're not 공민. But you two, I would like to beseech you to popularize that phrase, 우리 공화국. Make your friends and parents and loved ones say it, and then maybe it'll catch on. Yeah. And maybe it'll start to get the love it deserves.
There's a lovely bit of... I knew you were the right person to ask for this, Jacco. I love spending time with you.
Oh, thank you, David.
I will just say on this that I agree with what you've said, all of you. Two phrases that I liked from this book. One was this: when the origins of war are complicated, historians try to simplify them. When the origins of war are simple, historians try to complicate them.
Yeah.
I thought when I read that, I just thought that was brilliant. Another one that I underlined was in the Korean, obviously I've translated it as best I could. Those who cannot paint grey cannot be a painter. And this also applies to historians, that historians who cannot be grey should not be historians, because in the stories that we tell, it's not a Marvel movie. There's not very much black and white, but there's a lot of grey. The front cover of this book is grey. I've really enjoyed this. There's lots in this book that we haven't covered, by the way. We haven't talked about No Tae-woo being lefter than the left. We haven't talked about the descriptions of Kim Yong-sam and Kim Dae-jung and everything else. So there's a lot still in this. I hope more people read it, write it, put some English translations up in Korean media for everybody as well, of course.
Can I say something about that quote about the painting of the grey? Why he brings that in is Bryan, throughout the book, points to various myths, ways of storytelling about the Republic, which are very clearly black or white. I mean, basically, everyone in Gwangju was peaceful and on the side of good, and every paratrooper was bad. Every North Korean is bad, but these very sort of simple black and white narratives, and that's why he brings in Cezanne here that says that no, actually history, it's full of grey. Just like we talked about Park Chung-hee earlier. Yes, he brought Korea through a wonderful period of amazing economic development, but also he was a dictator, and some people did get killed for that, and other people who ran businesses that lost his favour were forced to sell or give their businesses to other people. So there were some chaebols that could have been big chaebols now, but they don't exist anymore because Park forced them to sell. So yeah, everything's grey. History is very grey, very complex. No less so in Korea than anywhere else.
And history only agreed. I'm glad you said the painter's name, because I wasn't sure of the pronunciation. Paul Cezanne, thank you. History only gives us the negative as well. Just like the Daily News, we write about when bad things happen. We write about bad things, and the news today tells us bad things. But history rarely tells us the good things. History doesn't tell us, hey, there are some nice things happened today. Somebody smiled at a person on the bus, and somebody did something well. And when you look through Korean history, you'll find tales of massacres and dictatorship and oppression and suppression and all of these dastardly, dark and devilishly bad things to read. But that's what history gives us sometimes, and we miss the good, and we miss the grey and the ambiguous. And I think that in this conversation we've found a bit of grey amongst ourselves and a bit of colour.
Celebrate the grey in 우리 공화국.
I just want to say, I will not be getting a tattoo of Park Chung-hee.
He thought about it.
Eunbi will instead.
Yeah.
Oh no!
Just in case, someone watching this wants to come after me. I'm not an avid supporter. I may get another tattoo of Lee Sun-shin, but let's leave it at that. I won't be getting a tattoo. Shout out to Lee Sun-shin, not to Park Chung-hee.
Now, there's something that's really changed since I came to Korea in 1996. No one had tattoos in 1996 unless they were gangsters, and no one talked about getting tattoos in 1996. And now suddenly, here we have somebody who says, yes, I've got one, and I'm going to get more. And even women have them now in Korea. So that's
more than men. More women have tattoos than men, according to the statistics.
There's some stats now. Oh, hello.
One of the linguistic things is interesting, because if you ask somebody, say, if I ask my wife or that generation, they'll still call them often munshin.
Munshin,
which is the older word. It's also associated with slavery and Joseon dynasty and branding criminals in a way. They would put them on their faces, right?
Yeah.
They would brand them, whereas tattoo is very modern. So people might be reluctant to talk about munshin, tattoos.
So they're using the word tattoo in Korean.
Yes, 그냥 tattoo.
Okay.
Still illegal. I want to do a show on tattoos, because when international students come and get them here, they're often done illegally, and you have to go and get the address, and you go and meet somebody, and then you go into the thing.
It's quite shady.
Yeah, it's quite shady. Yeah.
Do you want to advertise your tattoo parlor? For questions, place them in the comments under the YouTube here.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
And that's it. Relax. Good. I'm going to eat a jelly.
Yes, have a jelly.
Well done.